Answer any questions. Thanks, fam. Someone Lego lamb yesterday. That's what I'm talking about. Thanks, y'all. Lots of compliments here. Say hi to Vi. Talk about the idea of community. Yeah, I mean, we evolved in tribes, just flat out. 200,000 years, bands of humans. An anthropologist named Dunbar created this concept, really identified that these bands were limited to about 150 people, which is about the maximum amount of people that we can give a shit about. And anytime the tribe was bigger than that, they would split off. So you could have like the Navajo Nation, for example, or some bigger group, but the tribe of that amount of people was really essential. And with that tribe, you shared everything. If someone got meat, you shared the meat. If someone needed to raise a child, you shared that. There was this collapse of this self-first identity of this is all about me, this is all about my wealth, what I'm doing, what everything's going on for me. It was about the survival of your group, of your team, of your squad. And I think we see that mirrored in so many of the different tribal surrogates that we have out in the world, like team sports, or like being in the military, or being, even in a fraternity or something like that, like a group of people that you're really going through shared experiences. And the most important of these experiences are the initiatory experiences, those things that are hard and challenging, those things that you learn something about yourself, you learn something about the people around you. And ultimately, to be in that state where you really get to see somebody and know them and trust them, I mean, it's one of the absolute best feelings. And in the absence of that, you have loneliness. And loneliness is the number one predictor of early mortality. Like, this is the thing that's eating us up more than anything else. So finding the ways to initiate into that in our modern time is absolutely essential. Like, that's the game. We got to get back to that sense. And you can read Sebastian Junger's book, Tribe, to talk about how these external hardships can create this sense of community, and that's important. I imagine if this freeze happened and it was even more intense than it is right now here in Austin, then all the neighbors would be pulling together. We'd see who had water. We'd see what was going on, and that would actually be really valuable. We would look back at that, and even though it was hard, we'd be like, man, remember that freeze of 2021? Like, that was kind of awesome. And I think that's part of the fantasy of you don't want something bad to happen, but when you've been prepping for it and you've got the people that and everybody's going to come over. I remember when earthquakes used to happen in Southern California, and everybody would come out into the living room, and sometimes we'd have my brother's friends staying over, and it was like a camp out in the living room because it was the safest place based on the structure and the windows. And I still remember those nights with like the utmost fondness. So, but putting yourself intentionally in those situations, I think, is really important. It's really the basis for what I started with the Fit for Service Fellowship and what we have going with the Fit for Service Academy app. It's just a way to start to re-access that, and it's going to be the subject. I'm going to touch on it in my next book, and then talk more about it in the subsequent book, and really like focus on it for my fourth book. So I kind of have my next 3 books planned out. So yeah, I don't know. It's a little bit on community. I missed a ton of questions. Sorry about that. Right now I'm seeing take on primordial sexual energy as that potent, creative, powerful energy that's beyond our animalistic use of it, alchemized on a higher frequency. So this is, one of those concepts that's deeply intertwined with tantric practice. It's the ability to use that sexual energy as a doorway to help you access source. And something I talked at length about with Layla Martin on my podcast. I think it's called Sex Your Way to Source. And it's about utilizing this energy for more accretive purposes than just the pleasure of the act itself. And this has deep mystical roots. Have I been able to do that personally? No. Do I understand it philosophically? I absolutely do. And I think this is something that, my wife and I are definitely interested in learning more about. She's reading a book, and we haven't got very far as the practices. I think one of the practices is a practice called nesting, which is when you're in that heightened state, you stay really close and mirror your breathing, and this is supposed to charge up your body. It just kind of feels like cuddling to me. But we're early in the game, so I'll report back when I have something substantial to report about that. What recommendations do I have for people who are isolated with no friends or intimate contact? There's a couple things. One is that nobody is truly isolated. Like it's really a myth to think that you're isolated. And even in the studies of loneliness, it's not the amount of people they're surrounded by, it's the subjective feeling of loneliness. And what I mean by that is what Charles Eisenstein calls the myth of separation, this idea that we're separate from the world around us, separate from nature, separate from the sunset, separate from the food, separate from our environment, separate from source itself. We're not. We're connected. And so even if you were not around anybody, you could have a life that was enriched and felt connected to the world itself. So that's one strategy, is to just really deepen your connection with yourself and deepen your connection with the world around you. And as far as like meeting other people, you're going to have to find people who are on your same frequency. And some of those may be digital and virtual, and some of those may be in person, but you'll have to change your usual patterns and habits and explore new places and really open yourself up. A lot of times we're too afraid of rejection to even allow ourselves the opportunity to meet that person who might, be that great friend or be that lover. I think a lot of times we think about rejection just in terms of, the opposite sex, but it's absolutely not true. Sometimes we're afraid to talk to that person who we think we really want to be friends with because we're trying to play it cool. But, a lot of my best friends, it's been, there's been some way that we met or something that happened, but I just kept up with them. And that's, probably one of the biggest differences, like Bodie Miller, or, Roger Huerta in the early days, all these different people who were like my best friends. Like these people, I would meet them, but I would just keep following up, and then eventually that friendship would really form. And that was the basis for it. So, have the courage, change your identity, shift your identity to the person who has the courage to go out and meet that new person, has the courage to be vulnerable. Who gives a shit if you got rejected? You didn't lose anything. It's just your ego's perceived loss. You didn't lose shit. So, but what you have to gain is potentially a lifelong friend. And, again, that's also the purpose of creating the Fit for Service Academy. It's the purpose of trying to find a place where people who are exploring these topics and thoughts and understand the principles of vulnerability and kindness can gather and meet. So definitely check out that app if you're interested in any of that as well. Let's see. Going through a breakup, any advice? I think I would probably want to have more specific advice on that, but this is a hard thing because your identity becomes, is very intertwined with the relationship itself. You are so-and-so who is dating so-and-so, and so you co-opt all of that identity to make you feel a certain way about yourself. And when that person leaves, you actually lose a part of yourself. And this is not the way it has to be, but this is just the way it normally is. So the key thing is to restore your identity and keep your identity as separate from who you were dating or what you were doing. If it could fit on a business card or something that someone could describe you as, that's not the reason to love yourself. That's not the reason. That's not actually who you are. Who you are is your essence. Recently I had a ceremonial ketamine journey, intramuscular, very intense, very deep. And the place that I went to, I was completely stripped of identity. I was absolutely stripped of it. It was one of the only experiences where I was like, I'm not sure if I'm alive or not alive, nor am I sure that I can even put that into words or think about that. I just had this experience of completely, I've evaporated into light and geometry before, but this was different. And what I realized is the only thing that I brought with me to that place was my essence, my intangible essence, the thing you couldn't touch or you couldn't, but it was me, with beyond the body and beyond what I'm able to think about and beyond what I'm able to perceive and beyond the computational powers. It was my essence, and it was like, you could describe it as a tone. If I was able to see, I would imagine it could be a hue, but it really felt like a sound. Like if I was a sound, that was the sound that I was. And that's who I really am, and that's who we really are. Everything else is just the decorations. And so if we can learn to love ourselves for who we really are, for our tone, then I think all of these other things, they're just the ways that you navigate and learn and explore and play through life. And so that would be my general advice. Is wanting pleasure a painful experience? No. I mean, it can be. I think what you're getting at is, desire is an agreement to be unhappy until you get what you want. I think Naval Ravikant, said that, or some paraphrase of that. Certainly, you can put yourself in a position of lack by desiring something else, and that could be a state of suffering. But it's natural. To try and get rid of that would be like to try and go outside and you want it to be sunny, so you start punching the fog. Like, we're hardwired for pleasure. So I think the key thing is to be able to braid the different aspects of self. The animal always wants pleasure, it wants safety, it wants reproduction. That's the animal. That's the person that's not even the person, that's the animal. And then there's the player, the one with the jersey, the one with the name, and the one with the name on its back and the number and all of the stats and everything else. That's our ego, right? And there's that thing. What does that thing want? Well, it wants to be better than the other players. That's the only way that it knows. It's playing a game and it wants to be better than the other players. That's our identity. And then there's that something else. There's our soul. And what does our soul want? Well, our soul wants to, as Ram Dass says, love everything, not every being, but everything, and to know itself as love. And that's what the soul wants. And those are all three real things about ourselves. Now, you can argue with the linguistics of it, but that's the nature of who we really are. And so to understand that all of these different things have their own prerogative, and then our job is to braid everything together. Because we're not only going to be able to be one or the other. That's spiritual bypass, or that's, all of this stuff. We're all of those things. We're always going to have an ego. We're always going to be an animal. And we're always going to have that aspect of ourselves that wants to know itself as love and know everything else as an expression of that love. So if you braid all those together in a single strand, then you'll understand and have this more holistic approach, not denying or renunciating any of these different desires or drives or motivations, just recognizing them and seeing them and choosing how to chart your course from there. All right, I'll do one more because I can smell the brisket cooking back there. Marijuana and personal experience. I've had a couple questions about this on this post. I think it's a very interesting tool. And for me, it's a tool that increases my somatic awareness more than anything. And that's where it's the best. Now, that said, I have produced some pretty epic poetry on a small dose of edibles. But honestly, I have to be so careful with edibles. Like 3 milligrams, 5 milligrams, 10, I'm in another universe. And beyond that, like, forget it. It's the worst psychedelic experience I've ever had, was having too much edible marijuana. Like, I'm not interested. I'm not having any snacks that Joey Diaz gives me. I'm not getting dosed. Like, it's not going to happen. But, that said, like, if I'm stretching or rolling out, like if I want to roll out on the lacrosse ball and I get high and I start rolling out, like an hour and a half will go by and I'm in there doing some deep work. It's incredible. Sometimes, as I said, it's really good for my spoken word poetry, and I just have to be mindful. There's like a threshold, and I don't always get it right. But those are really the two things that I use it for most productively. It's not necessarily the most pleasurable experience for me. It's a productive experience, and I know some people really love it. There's not a lot of psychedelics that are actually pleasurable for me now. I think at some point they used to be. I used to get high with my friend John Orton, And we would get so high and we'd eat Taco Cabana and we'd fucking laugh. And it was really fun. It's not that fun anymore. It's productive. Same with mushrooms. I'm sure I could get in a situation where I'm really laughing again, but it's work. Like a lot of these things are productive work. And that's the way that I treat them. I treat everything in a real ceremonial context. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I should do this more often. You guys are fucking awesome, and I miss being able to chat. And I wish there was a way that I could get to more questions and stuff. But happy I was able to do this, and yeah, more soon. Have a beautiful week, everybody. Love you guys. Ayahuasca recap podcast coming out tomorrow, and it was fucking intense. And I'm doing that with Eric Godzi. It's split into 2 sections. It's like 4.5 hours, and so keep a lookout for that tomorrow. And as I mentioned earlier, the Fit for Service Academy app. It's got all kinds of things: guided meditations, ecstatic dance, master classes, breath work, community. It's got all kinds of stuff, so you can download that in the App Store if you're interested in that as well. I love you guys, and we'll talk.